Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. I must say I'm a little disappointed today. I've been kind of semi-hitting on our leader for over 30 years, just waiting for a weak spot or a weak moment. And Shroud says, "Well, I finally got you fixed up." She says, "We're going to have you and she together at the powwow." And I thought, at last, it's finally nice. I've been keeping myself perfumed and handsome, and I didn't know that she meant at the meeting. Well, I'll keep going for another 30 years. We'll keep hitting you. But I'm glad to be here this afternoon, whatever it is, to talk about different subjects, maybe of keeping it simple a little bit. And this is kind of a touching week for us, all of us, because today's the beginning of the last week before AA, 65 years ago. Dr. Bob was sober a week and would be drunk again within a few days. And then a week from today, he finally set down the drink his sponsor bought him and set down the knife he used to do the surgery. And that moment began the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a kind of a moral there, too, I want to talk about just a moment. They both had been members of the Oxford group, as most of you know, and that's how they got together. And Dr. Bob and Bill had got together in this home, and they discussed identification, and Dr. Bob identified, and he was so pleased, and he asked Bill to move into his house with him, and he spent a couple of weeks there, and they talked about spiritual matters and deep-seated understandings and God consciousness and very good things. And then Dr. Bob went on a trip and got drunk. And when he came back and got sober this time, Bill remembered that it wasn't sitting talking about spiritual matters that had kept him sober as an alcoholic. They were great things, but what had kept him sober apparently was trying to help other people. So instead of spending more time discussing spiritual matters, they went up to the Akron hospital and found an alcoholic to talk to, who became the number 3 alcoholic. I heard him talk a number of years ago. He's kind of a funny guy. He was a lawyer from Louisville who'd went to Akron, Ohio on a geographic, and he was so tired of people talking to him about his drinking, and his wife was a strong woman. He says, "I was laying in that bed in Akron, Ohio. My wife said there's 2 fellers who want to talk to me about my drinking." And I thought, oh, hell, I don't want to talk to anybody but more about my drinking. But she was a rather persuasive woman. So I talked to them, and them 2 fellers never talked to me about my drinking once. They talked to me about their drinking and how they felt. I never heard anybody describe me quite so clearly. I couldn't believe it. I've been stuck with them fellers ever since. And he became number 3, and on and on. And they lost a lot of people. They gained a few people. And ever since then, over the period of years, Alcoholics Anonymous has grown and flourished through difficulties, almost extinguished in the mid-1940s till Bill Wilson wrote the 12 Traditions in an effort to save AA. It was going the way of getting diminished. It has gone in various places, been very it's been bastardized and changed, and there have been revolutionary movements against it. And there's every so often, every couple of years, there seems to be some new movement or rational recovery or something else that takes a little bit of and argues against AA and goes to the newspapers and says AA is a cult, it's no good. I remember in 1961 or so, there was an article in Harper's called AA Cult or Cure by a fellow who'd been slipping for years, and that was his revenge on AA, and a lot of people around the country all in uproar about that. But the blessing of AA, of course, is that AA pays no attention to it officially. We don't care. Officially. We go home at night and think about it, but we don't do anything about it. The reporters will come, well, what do you think about this attack on AA? We have no opinion. You must have an opinion, for Christ's sake. No. Just amazing. And over the years, AA has flourished, and it continues to grow and has various... There have been books written. We have our book, and there seems to be an endless supply of other books by people who want to say what this book means. And I'm not arguing. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that's what happens. And here we are today. And think, what's the big deal about keeping it simple? Because and it's just an amazing thing how long AA continues to be successful, and how nearly everyone like us fights it. Today in America, where there's more sobriety than any place in the history of the world, in this room there's more sobriety than there was in the world in 1945, 10 years after AA started. And yet today in America, where there's AA everywhere, it's estimated well over 90% of alcoholics still die drunk. There's a direct result of drinking. And they die convinced there's no help for their condition, and the condition they have is not covered by AA or anything else. And that's why it's such a puzzlement. Just since I've been sober, in the 1950s, we finally got the Lasker Award. American Medical Association gave AA in 1951 an award for being the leader in public health for 1951. And yet here it is 40, 50 years later, and there are still doctors who do not believe in AA. It doesn't work. And then in the mid-1950s, a group of people thought it would be good if we could just identify this illness and get it set up once and for all and do an investigation and find out what it is, and then we can cure it and go on to the next event. So Yale University had a massive school of alcoholic studies in the 1950s, and they had all sorts of tests and studies. They brought in known alcoholics, and they compared them against known non-alcoholics, and they gave them psychological profiling, and they even to the point of giving them drinks to see if they could see a difference between an alcoholic and non-alcoholic. Give them 2 drinks and measure their response against 2 drinks and measure their response. I've often thought it'd really be fun to be a part of that test. Here's your drink today, thanks. Have another one. Don't mind if I do. That's all the test for today. Bullshit it is. But they had this massive series of tests and investigations, and they got all done with it. And they had a report that thick, and I read a synthesis of it. And it really boils down to the fact they found nothing much in common with these people, with these known alcoholics. They all had different backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, different psychological backgrounds. Some came from alcoholic homes. Some were the only alcoholics in their family. Some had abusive parents. Some had loving parents. Some were wealthy. Some were poor. Some were successful. Some were failures. The only 2 things really, overall and generally speaking, they found in common, and neither one of them could they understand. One was that for some reason no one could understand, the alcoholics seemed to have a change in their psychological profile after drinking. That shouldn't happen, but it did. And secondly, the alcoholics all ranked in the top 5 percentile of the population in perfectionism. And that shouldn't happen. I'm not a perfectionist. I just want things to be right, or to hell with it. That's right. And they continue the School of Alcoholic Studies. It's still going on after all these years at Rutgers University. They keep getting together, and specialists come there and talk to each other every summer. And they go home looking wise. But it didn't seem to do anything. And then, of course, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, in my time, I finally got a job in the medical corporation as a writer in 1960. And in 1961, about as I recall, I was writing for medical magazines, and I saw the first advertisement in a medical magazine that I'm aware of ever ran for the treatment of alcoholism. And it was wonderful. It said, doctors, at last you can treat your alcoholic patients without side effects, without bother. And it had a wonderful name to it. It's called Librium. And it said freedom to me. And I thought to myself, just my luck to miss that by a couple years. You know, I'd already been captured by fascists who think you shouldn't take pills. And then, of course, a year or two later, we saw the first Librium survivors come back to AA. One just came back to get my cake. Then I got a job in a television station, KHJ. It's no longer there. It's now KCAL, but at one time it was a very big station. And I was promotion director, and we had different things in our station. One day, about 1964 or 65, I was looking at our daily, what's going to be on the air that day, what to promote, and it talked about a man who was coming to lecture on returning to social drinking. And I went down to watch that from behind the camera, I'll tell you. And this guy was from Schick-Shadell Hospital in Seattle. And they had a new technique where they had discovered that if you redress the enzyme imbalance in a human body, you can drink successfully. I think, oh yeah. But he wound up now listen to this. He wound up his little stint by saying, I have here a martini. They say alcoholics can't drink a martini. We say, I can. And he drank the martini. And I didn't even want it, but my tongue went. Jesus, I couldn't believe it. And I thought, what does this mean? I thought, I wonder if 7-Eleven has any enzymes. But about 3 or 4 weeks later, unfortunately, he was giving another demonstration somewhere, and his enzymes didn't kick in quite right. And he wound up in a padded cell at Schick-Shadell. And shortly thereafter, they stopped curing returning alcoholics to social drinking. They now cure them in a week of abstinence, but no more social drinking. And in the late 1960s, I mean, these were golden days if you're looking for a way out. White Memorial Hospital, that's out not very far from here. They had a big page-and-a-half article in the Los Angeles Times that the Seventh-day Adventists had found a cure for alcoholism. And I read that with zeal. I wasn't quite ready to become a Seventh-day Adventist, but I could, what the hell. And it turned out what they had done in this hospital. Now, Seventh-day Adventists are very much against drinking, so it's amazing that they would do this. But they took one of their hospital wards and turned it into a bar, a regular bar with a bar and a back bar and a bartender. And they'd bring in these poor boobs, and they're sick. I say, what do you want, Slim? You want a little scotch? What do you go to? You got some of that medicine in it to make me sick? No. Regular scotch, promise you. Oh, really? Let me try one. Okay? Here you are. And they give them a glass, had a little cord on it, so I guess so they couldn't take it to their room. And hey, you Seventh-day Adventists know how to treat an alcoholic. I'll tell you. Give me another. And you could come in there every morning, every afternoon, have a couple of drinks. It's just wonderful. Then one morning, the poor boob would come in to get a drink. And as he drank it, they'd send an electric shock through the cord. Hold the ice next time, Fred. And then they'd give him a drink without a shock. That's more like it. Thanks a lot. See you later. He'd come back later. For a while there, I really thought. And from then on, the poor old guy was like a fawn in a forest fire. Finally, this poor boob would come in and say, you want a drink? I don't believe I do. And if they did that for 3 days, he was considered cured. And they had a 100% cure rate in that hospital. And it made big articles, was on the press, wire services. And of course, somebody did a follow-up about a year later, and nobody was sober. Most of them hadn't got beyond the first bar that didn't have any wires on the glasses. Around the end of the 1960s, they had another deal down in Albuquerque. I have a daughter down there as a prosecutor. I should have checked with her, but they had a doctor down there who had found a cure for alcoholism that made a lot of the papers. And that was that your family, when you were really drunk and goofy, your family would bring you to his office, and he'd take films of you, drunk. Then the next time you felt like drinking, you go by the office, and he would show you the films. And he would say, "Do you want to be like this?" "No, I don't." That was a wonderful breakthrough. But after a while, people just didn't have time to go to the show on the way. In the early 1970s, some of you may remember, RAND think tank in Santa Monica made front pages all over the world. Alcoholics can return to social drinking. And I'll tell you, that made a hubbub around, because the RAND Corporation is very legitimate, very straight arrow. They have no bone to axe to grind. And they said, had these big articles and the little tape, except for certain people who can't. But on the whole, alcoholics could return to drinking. And there's a technique starting slowly and little by little, and not going to crazy and going drunk and so on. And it just hung in midair for a year or two. People were returning to drinking. I looked around our group, see if any of them had. They weren't making it. And about 2 years later, finally, some doctor in North Carolina did a follow-up, got a list, and did a follow-up on their success rate. And they were all drunk. And they had done follow-ups saying they were sober, and here they were drunk. And I talked to one of the guys in the RAND Corporation, and I said, how can these guys be drunk if you say you're doing follow-up on them? He said, we called them every month, asked them how they were doing. You just see some boob somewhere. Yeah, still doing okay. And there's all sorts of movements and things like that going on, and always. And AA continues, and people shake their fists. There are many more things, but there's a lot of actions. And Alcoholics Anonymous continues to function. And there are break-offs and people who say AA isn't what it doesn't have to be the way it is. There's a person I heard a talk recently, a guy who fairly well-known speaker saying, "Why should we believe what Alcoholics Anonymous, the book, says? If you were sick, would you go to a medical book written in 1939? And it sounds kind of funny to us, but newcomers say, "No, I wouldn't. Tell me what you've got." And he steers him into his own particular bunch of crap, which kills him, as far as I know. And this goes on again and again and again. And that's why it's almost such a puzzlement, because people would like to think that Alcoholics Anonymous in its present form is out of date or doesn't work anymore. And yet to this moment, it's the only thing in the history of mankind that has kept a number of alcoholics sober over a period of time. Most of us know about the Washingtonians, who in 1840, 6 guys got together, 6 drunks, and they got working out a deal. They didn't know what they were doing, and they elected officers and decided to help each other stay sober because they could identify with each other in a cheap bar in Baltimore. And little by little they grew, and pretty soon they had more people, and people laughing at them, ridiculing them. A couple of years they had a bunch of people. By 1842 they were in 5 or 6 states, and this is without telephones or radios or anything, just man to man. By 1845 they estimated they had 100,000 sober drunkards. Now you think, may not seem like much to you, but AA, with all the communication available after 5 years, had a little over 1,000 members. Didn't have 1,000, and they weren't sober very long. They were just in and out. They had when Bill wrote the book, 1938, he said that We are a group of over 100 men and women who have staged over a year. And he later wrote that actually there were 78, but he thought 100 sounded better. And we know that. All of us understand that. I said, yeah, sure, Bill. I said, and what they did in 1845, of course, and thereafter, they said something which sounds right because it sounds right today. If we can help drunkards, we should help all sorts of people. We have such a wonderful thing going. We should help all sorts of people. And they perhaps we're doing a disservice by confining ourselves to just drunkards. So they begin to get active in other things, and a great many of them got into the prohibition movements, or temperance as they called it, stamping out sale of alcohol. Some of them got into political movements. Some of them got into fight to annex Texas against Mexico. Some of them got into all sorts of things. And this tremendous organization of well-meaning, a group very similar to AA in many respects, got started and really did wonderfully. And by 1848, the movement was extinct and nearly all of them died drunk. Very few survivors. Guy wrote in 1861, one of the survivors, he wrote, I don't know what happened. We were doing so well, and then suddenly people just turned on each other. Nobody's interested in what we had to sell. And they were so extinct that by 1944, when AA was coming apart in much the same manner, with many of the same problems they had, and people fighting, and people arguing, and people getting drunk, and people withdrawing. A guy in North Carolina wrote Bill Wilson a letter about the Washingtonians. He'd never heard of them. He had to look it up in the library and found out what a similar thing it was, and that's what he sat down and wrote the Traditions, based a great deal on the Washingtonian experience, and continued to keep it simple all these years. And now we are at the 65th anniversary. Continual friction within AA. There's always friction. There's only one problem with Alcoholics Anonymous, the basic problem. It's full of alcoholics. That's the basic problem. And you can't even say that anymore. I'm not judging, I'm just reporting. They always use the third tradition. That's something to just, in passing, if you're new, most everybody else knows it, but if you're new, I'll tell you. People come to AA and say, you can't keep me out of AA, I'm not an alcoholic, but it says the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking, and I've got a desire to stop drinking, so there. Ha! And people say, I guess you got us there, Jim. But you got to remember, the short form of the traditions are just an abbreviation of the long form of the tradition, which is the way they were written. And the long form of the tradition, the third tradition specifically states, we want to help all those who suffer from alcoholism. And when they abbreviated, they just put down a desire to stop drinking. Nobody in 1945 had any idea that non-alcoholics would try to sneak into AA someday. We can't get the alcoholics in, but the damn non-alcoholics. And that's why one of the great things that sets AA and the Washingtonians apart, of course, from everything else, is their simplicity in one regard. They are the only two movements in the treatment of alcoholism in the last 5,000 years that have been composed of alcoholics talking to other alcoholics. And the reason for this, it was so important, because this is what brings about identification. Without that, it's just information. And so over the years, AA has continues to flourish with variations. Sometimes I think alcoholics get bored and want to make it a little more complex than they do. Every so often today in America, there's little things, silly things like this, out of nowhere. In Minneapolis a few years ago, there's a strong movement. Get rid of the Lord's Prayer. Why? Well, it offends our Jewish newcomers. That's the argument they used. And I said, which ones? Well, we don't have any names, but we know they're there. You know. Down around Oceanside, there's a meeting this week voting to get rid of the Lord's Prayer because they're afraid that if they say the Lord's Prayer, the state will consider Alcoholics Anonymous a religion, and forbid people from going to it. Just craziness. And that sort of thing goes on all the time, different things. And it's so hard to remember that what Alcoholics Anonymous is, it's hard to accept for complex people like you and me because it is simple. We have books written on what the steps really mean. Now they say, well, Bill Wilson wrote a book on what the steps really mean. And that's true, he did. But of course, there is one little ameliorating circumstance to that, and I'm not putting it down at all. But when Bill Wilson, after his 10th birthday, he went into kind of a bad depression. And he didn't know what caused it. I think most of us know what caused it. After your 10th birthday, you have a tendency to go into a depression. You build up to the 10th birthday, and that's it. The decimal birthdays are always kind of a dangerous spot. Your first year, your 5th year, your 10th year, because you get a dose of rights at that birthday you don't get otherwise. You don't get on your 8th birthday, your 13th birthday. But I'm 10 years sober. I deserve to be treated a little better than this. Or 5 years sober, or 1 year sober. I've had my birthday. Well, don't worry, you won't have many more. But Bill Wilson went into had a 10th birthday, and then went into a depression. And for all he knew, that's no longer AA worked, because he had nobody ahead of him to talk to about it. And he finally followed some advice of his friends, and he went to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist worked with him for 10 years. And it always was kind of a dirty little secret around AA, but it's quite well known in many circles. Bill Wilson's depression continued for 10 years. Not anything wrong with the psychiatrist, but I think it's generally accepted that for people like us, self-study is not the way to get out of a depression. Well, I'm feeling good this morning. Why? If you study it long enough, I can guarantee you will never have a good day till you die. And after 10 years, his friends were saying, and his followers, Bill, it doesn't seem to be working out. Maybe you ought to just go back to doing what you did at first. And he did, and his depression lifted, as he said. But near the end of this depression, when he's undergoing psychiatric and some religious studies, he wrote the 12 and 12. And they reflected almost a little more psychiatric, religious flavor than most of his writings. And there's nothing wrong with the 12 and 12. It's very accurate. But people can pick sentences out of there to prove almost anything. And we do that a lot, pick sentences to prove something. We pick sentences out of Bill's writings like we pick phrases out of the Bible. You could just prove anything you want to prove if you want to do it. And we get away from the basic simplicity of the idea. To me, and this is all the things I'm saying today are my opinion. My opinion. I'm required to say that. I secretly feel I'm speaking for Bill and Dr. Bob in heaven. But in my opinion, AA means what it says. Dr. Bob used to talk about that a lot. He said that when reduced to the last AA program, it's a program of simplicity, of steps meaning what they say. And the continual efforts to make it more complex and to make it more unusual or to make it as though there's certain facts here that only are known to a few in the inner circle. And that may be, but I know it works without getting into the inner circle. Because I'm not in the inner circle. I've been working for me for 41 years, and I'm feeling better than most of the people who know the secrets. So I want to speak on behalf of the simplicity of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just what it says. I know there are new people here today who wonder if they're an alcoholic. Well, how can you tell? If you look at the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's kind of a tip-off. It asks you, are you having a problem with alcohol? It doesn't say that you have to be in jail 40 times or anything else. Have you had a problem with alcohol? Yeah. And it doesn't say you have to be a crazed fiend. And if you didn't have a problem with alcohol, you very likely wouldn't come here. People hardly ever go out of their garden doors in the morning and say, what a golden day. I'm going to join AA. It's an entirely... We come here under the lash. I've got some problems with drinking, but it's not my fault. That's okay. We don't care whose fault it is. You've been abused a lot. You probably were misunderstood as a child and not nurtured either. That's right. You've got it. Good. Okay, you admit you got a problem with drinking. Then, now, somebody last night, at one of the meetings yesterday, said something that I used to think was in there. When they read the 12 steps, they read, we admit we were alcoholic and therefore our lives have become unmanageable. And I had to be sober for a while before my sponsor pointed out that is what it says at all. He says, we admit we were powerless over alcohol, dash, in the English language, dash means end of thought, beginning of new thought. And you also admit that your life is unmanageable. Are you having some problems sober? Yes. But it's not my fault. Good. We don't care whose fault it is. All you admit is this. I'm having some troubles drinking, and I'm having some troubles sober. All right. Now what? Now you're an alcoholic. If you could control either one of those two elements, you wouldn't be here. If you could drink successfully, you'd be out drinking successfully. If you could stay sober comfortably, you'd be out staying sober comfortably. You know, there are some alcoholics just like us who can stay sober. In about a week or two, A&E is going to do a big special on Alcoholics Anonymous, hour-long special, on June, 13th, 12th, Monday night anyway, they told me about it. And they did some interviews in New York, and they came out and asked me if they could interview me and some other people in Los Angeles. And they set me up at Ohio Street. We have a meeting hall. Most of you know about this Ohio Street, and there's a big windows behind it. I sat in front of these windows, and they answered me questions. You have to do that for anonymity, so you couldn't see you, just a black outline. And I believe very much in anonymity because the nature of my work, I'm on television a lot and in newspapers a lot and being interviewed and quoted, but never as a member of AA. As a recovered alcoholic sometimes, but also for my work. But I know when that camera started rolling, and it was going to be seen in households throughout the Western world, I just had a terrible temptation to go. I fought it back, but it wasn't easy. But that's one of the questions he asked me. I don't know if we had the special or not, but he asked me, he said, why is it some alcoholics can stop drinking and others can't? Have to go to AA. And that's true. That is one of the bafflements of all time. Not all time, but there are. And most of us have had examples placed before us. Examples of, there are people who apparently, who are as alcoholic as I am, who, when they're sufficiently psychologically threatened, maybe a loss of their job, maybe a loss of their family, maybe a death in their family, maybe something terribly threatening, they say, I quit! And they quit, and that's the end of it. And then there's some people, apparently alcoholics, who not only are physically or psychologically, but physically addicted and must be withdrawn. That's what the treatment centers were originally built for, to withdraw people. And they get withdrawn, and each step of the way they learn a little bit more about the dangers of what they're doing. And by the time they get sober, they say, I quit! And that's the end of it. And there are cases of all these people. In fact, that's what Chick Shadell does. I'm not putting them down now. We laugh at what they say, but what they say is true. They say, if you are of our type of alcoholic, we can withdraw you from alcohol, and you will stay sober with only 2 follow-up treatments. And they do that, and they stay sober. They got a long list of names of people who are successful doing it. And then there seems to be another type, and Bill Wilson didn't know about these types when he wrote this book. He felt there were types, and he saw these kind of examples. He didn't know what to make of it, but he knew it didn't hold true for people like him and the others. So again and again through this book of Alcoholics Anonymous, he refers to alcoholics of our type. Alcoholics of our type. He doesn't ever say what the other types are, but there are alcoholics of our type. And these are the type that baffle medicine and baffle religion and baffle employers and baffle families. People who are alcoholic and are psychologically threatened terribly, maybe the loss of a job, maybe the loss of their family, maybe a death in the family, and they quit. But sooner or later, always drink again. Or the person who was medically withdrawn and taught each step of the way what's wrong, and he gets off and he says, I quit! But eventually always drinks again. And I'm sure most of the people in this room have had that phenomenon of drinking again after they thought you had stopped, this time for sure. And they say, how could you do this? How could you do this? After all that has happened, after all the harm you've caused, all the pain you brought to us and everyone around us, how could you do this? And they act as though we have an answer. And we don't. I'm baffled too. And so the only known answer I ever found out, maybe there's a better one, is just leave me alone. Just leave me alone, damn it! And go try to make them feel it's their fault somehow, I guess. But I don't know why. But that's the alcoholics of our type. Now, these alcoholics who apparently are able to stop, there's not many of them, but they're well known in the alcoholic community. They're illustrated to us by loved ones and friends, and by doctors, and by all sorts of people. You can stop if you've got the ability. Now, those are the people who are stopping on willpower, apparently, who have enough desire. And that's what makes it so baffling for us, because most of us, I am sure, have the feeling at one time or another, we are like those people. I am one of those. I will quit. And if the only reason we would keep that from happening is that other thing they throw in chapter 3, or else I must accept the obsession voluntarily or involuntarily that somehow, someday I will control and enjoy my drinking. Because obviously I can't go on this way. I can't drink, and my sobriety is terrible, and they're giving me hell, and I quit, and they don't understand why. They make my life so unbearable. I have to drink, and they don't understand why. And my problem isn't drinking anyway. It's these boobs what they're doing to me. And on. Just a death on the installment plan. It's kind of a funny thing that sometimes doctors have said to alcoholics, heard it there last night in our talk. Doctor said, for you to drink is to die. And the doctor told me that once. And I remember having a few drinks and thinking, I hope so. I hope so. What's even worse is that to drink for us is to stay alive in pain and frustration and agony. Now, why wouldn't anybody want to go to AA and get rid of that? Because such a thing so simple as that can't help us. My life is much more complex than me turning over my life to God and writing down little things I've done and making amends to people who've been screwing me for 30 years. Here's $10 for calling me the police on me that time. Hope it wasn't inconvenient for you. And that's why the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is so vital. There are a lot of people who poo-poo the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am one who believes in it a great deal, because that gives us the framework, the structure, if you will, for people to survive till they can get simplified down to where the steps mean something. And that's why it's so important. That's why, they say in the people who create disruptions always, that incidentally, I've been sober a long time. Not as long as some, but more than most. And I've been sober at a time when I was able to go and sit and talk to Bill Wilson for an hour in 1963. And I heard Ebby give the only talk he ever gave in a convention. And I didn't think much about any of these things. I just, Only later I take credit for it. But so I've been active all this time, and I've been asked to do a lot of things in AA that most of you haven't had a chance to do yet. For instance, in the last few years, I've been asked to come and speak in exotic places like Cape Town and Johannesburg and Berlin and Paris and London and Dublin and Belfast and Oslo. Oslo is a great place for Norwegians to go and visit, because you really feel I'm among decent people at last. And they took me up to where my grandfather came from, and I finally began to understand that part of the nature of my problem, it isn't all alcoholism, it's genetics. I saw this bleak place, and they all left, a whole bunch of Norwegians, thousands of them left in the 1880s and came to America to get out of that damn climate. Then they all settled in North Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin. And spent the next 50 years saying, Jesus is cold here too. Yeah. That's the kind of head I have to deal with every morning of my life. But I've been a lot of places all over Canada and Mexico and Costa Rica and a couple weeks ago I was in Australia and New Zealand. And you would think you would really find exotic aspects of AA in all these places, but you don't. Except for the accents, you hear the same emotions you hear here and in your home group. And every group in the world seems to come down to one thing. There are some people there who have survived long enough to take a series of actions that didn't make sense, allowed themselves to be led into taking simple actions that didn't seem to do any good. And there, little by little, their perceptions of life seem to have changed. And they're feeling different, and they're looking at the same things differently, and they're feeling good. You see them in meetings on a continuing basis. And in every group, there's a group of people who come who cannot or will not take the steps because they don't make sense, or they think they're giving up their freedom or dictatorship or whatever it might be. They cannot and they will not take the steps, and they ridicule and criticize the people who do. And in the middle are newcomers. And both of these groups actively fight for their souls. And it's amazing we keep as many people as we do. Because, as was said yesterday, Bob said it, stole it from me probably. The arguments against AA are intellectually much more satisfying than the arguments for AA. AA is just a series of self-delusions, just prayer and taking actions that make no sense. It's just ridiculous. And the arguments for it are just, sober. I'm sober. Good night. Not much of a satisfactory answer. But all over the world this goes on because Alcoholics Anonymous deals with alcoholics. And what's so remarkable about alcoholics is that all over the world they're the same. Not superficially, they're not the same in this room, they're not the same at that table. If you're looking for differences, you can find them all around you. There's a lot of differences. That's why you have to get into the program a little bit. That's why you have to try to hopefully come to believe that maybe there's some power here that can make you stay sober, help you stay sober. And that power doesn't have to be your childhood God that you're afraid of. It could be your sponsor. My higher power was my sponsor because I came from a strong church that promulgated the fact that if I was a sinner, I was gone. And I was a bad sinner, and I was gone. And my sponsor stepped in and became my higher power. And people laughed at me. Said, there's that crazy bastard thinks his sponsor's God. I didn't think he was God. But I respected him because somehow I had the feeling he knew how I felt. And there's I'd been getting advice all my life. Just ridiculous because nobody knows how I feel. I had the feeling he might know how I felt. And I could take some of his advice. And that's all you have to do in the second step. You have to come to believe there's a power greater than yourself who will enable you to not drink, to restore you to sanity. Because for drinkers like you and me, alcoholics of our type, that's a very easy way to describe what alcohol does. It induces temporary psychosis. It makes reality look different. And that's what psychosis does. It isn't exactly the same, but it's close enough. It makes reality look different. That's why, for example, alcoholics rarely ever become psychotic. Did you know that? Isn't that interesting? Because they always say alcoholism is the second greatest cause of insanity, but not from psychosis, from brain damage, from the drying out of the brain until you no longer can function. You lay in a bed and they change your diapers every day for 50 years because your body stays strong. But psychosis, alcoholics almost never become psychotic. Because why? Because when the conflict gets so bad that might induce a psychotic slip, the alcoholic will drink alcohol. It says in our book, and that's certainly correct, there seems to be at times there's no defense against the first drink, because you literally must drink to preserve your sanity sometimes. The one time I ever went through that, and I stayed sober because of my death of my son, and I was determined to stay sober, it got so bad I successfully committed suicide. And thank God somebody found me and brought me back to life to put me in the insane asylum, because I knew alcohol wouldn't drink it anymore. And so it turns out that alcoholics don't become psychotic because they induce psychosis. They say, well, why don't other people then drink when they're about to have a snap? Because it doesn't do that for them. It just dulls the existing reality. But I can literally change the looks of it. You with anyone, Granny? And in many areas of my life, it makes it possible. I remember in El Paso, living in fear that the household finance was going to call and take away our furniture. That's tough. We got a bunch of kids. Everybody's afraid to answer the phone. And my wife couldn't. And finally the phone rang, and I'd had a few little hits of rum just to tide me over. I was able to answer. I heard myself saying, "You keep up this crap, I'm not going to borrow from you anymore. Leave us alone." That's what makes getting sober so rare, so difficult for us, because we think stopping drinking is going to make it better, and stopping drinking makes it worse. That's why we got to have help and structure. And then you got to surrender to this whole thing, and later on take inventories and make amends and surrender again to God, and hopefully continue to live in some sort of way that will enable you to stay sober. Because as our book says, our sobriety is depending on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. What is the spiritual condition? Incessant prayer and meditation? Will that get us to the knowledge of God's will for me? I don't think so. The famous example of the prayer in my wall, and I've given it to most of the people I sponsor over the years. A guy named Thomas Merton, one of the great theologians of our time, classmate of Hal Marley, Columbia, signed himself into the monastery in Kentucky and spent 13 years in silence, this brilliant man, studying the nature of God's will. What is God's will? Now, 13 years every day without talking, that's good. That's impossible. But then he wrote a prayer after that. And that's on the wall of my office. Says, "Dear God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not know, have no idea of your will for me. The fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean I'm actually doing so. But I believe this. I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. I hope I never persist anything apart from that desire." Now, if a guy sitting there for 13 years, a brilliant man, every day for 13 years can't find God's will, I'm not liable to find it by 6 o'clock. So we all have to go in a received will, and sometimes God's will looks different. But over a period of time, experience and knowledge and conscience leads us to God's will. And that's what we surrender to, that AA works. And we must somehow keep it simple and don't get all trapped up in things. Sometimes people get so wrapped up in their study of AA, they don't have time to help a newcomer. "Don't bother me now. I'm studying AA, you crazy bastard. I've got a new book." People are always saying, "Boy, this book has got a lot of AA in it. Do you want to know a book with really a lot of AA in it? I could get you a copy for about $5.50. Because this really is a simple program. But the program's simplicity is self-defeating among new people almost. And that's why we have to have structure. And that's the great value of sponsorship. And that's the great advantage of staying around people for whom it has already happened, because they will pull you along, and stay away from people who are saying, "Don't do it," because they literally can kill you. And I know that can be done, because in the years I slipped, the 10 years I slipped in and out of AA, I pulled a lot of people out of AA. I would leave a meeting and say, "Let's get drunk. These are a bunch of old religious pukes. Let's go get drunk." And I'd get them drunk. And I don't know, someone must have maybe died. Terrible to make amends to such people like that. You can't find them. But I know this, that the simplicity of last week I was talking down in the South Bay Roundup briefly, and I mentioned something I'll mention today because if you've heard before, just doze off. But in 1950, AA was coming apart. Bill Wilson had written the 12 traditions, and the membership would not accept them. We don't want rules. We don't want laws. We don't want them. So in an effort to save AA, Bill and Dr. Bob decided if we could get all these warring factions together, the guys from Los Angeles who hate Akron AA because they say it's too much religion, the people in Chicago who hate New York because it doesn't have enough religion, and all over the country, people getting drunk and crazy, they decided to have a meeting. And so on July 4th weekend, 1950, they had the first meeting of sober alcoholics in the history of the world. In Cleveland, Ohio. I have a picture of that. Not very many people there. I mean, compared to what they are now, not as many as there are here. And they introduced the 12 traditions. They had 6 young guys. Each took 2 traditions. I got those tapes. They're interesting. Got up and tried to show these are not rules. These are not laws. These are efforts to save our lives. But the highlight of that convention to me was Dr. Bob gave a talk. And he gave that, to me, synthesized AA. He was old and dying of cancer. They said, Bob, you probably wouldn't want to talk at this convention. Bill's going to talk, but you probably wouldn't. Oh, he said, no, I have to talk. It's necessary. I'm the most sober person in the world next to Bill, and I was the one who got sober with Bill. And so on July 4th, his son and another guy helped this tall, gaunt, dying man to the podium. And he tried to put on a brave front. He said, I'm so happy to be here. I want to welcome you all to Cleveland. I hope you go back and tell the boys and girls in your home group what we're trying to do, and we have to live together in peace and harmony. Words to this effect. And he said, I want to apologize for my health. It hasn't been as good as I hoped it would be. I've been in bed much of the last few months. I hope it's going to get better. And he said, I'm pleased that some small thing I did a number of years ago in Akron helped bring this about. And then he said, and then he gave what I construe to be the Gettysburg Address of Alcoholics Anonymous. Short, succinct, and answers of all the questions. Why is this simple? He said, I would indeed be remiss if I didn't call your attention to 2 or 3 things that have been very important to me. Words to this effect. He said, first, keep the program simple. Let us not louse it all up with Freudian complexes, which may be of interest to the scientists, but have nothing to do with our work here. Our work here, when reduced to the last, consists of love and service. And we all know what love is, and we all know what service is. And secondly, he said, let us guard that erring member, the tongue, and try to use it with kindness and understanding. And there isn't a person in this room who doesn't know exactly what he means. We're all very expansive and kindly when things are our way, but as soon as we're threatened, just cut and slash and criticize and attack for our own sick ego. And lastly, he said, let us never be too busy to help the man behind us. To give him a pat on the back when he needs you, to take him to a few meetings. Because none of us would be here if someone hadn't done it for us. He said, let us never reach that stage of smug complacency where we're too busy to help our fellow alcoholic. And then he said a few more closing remarks and sat down, and shortly thereafter was dead. And that speech has been reported many times and taped, and it's been, but it's just to be part of the. Oh, it's like everything else. Things in the Bible. That's all very nice. Yeah, we heard that talk, and tell us more things. But he really stopped and think about it. That is succinctly is what we're here for. And you and I must strive to keep this program simple. We must strive to keep it composed of alcoholics, so that alcoholics yet to come will come and be able to identify. Because non-alcoholic advice is just information. Alcoholic advice becomes advice. And that's why it's so important. I'm sure most of us will have grandchildren perhaps. I already have a grandson in AA. But I have other grandchildren, I suppose, who need to come to AA. And I want to hear about the 12 steps and doing these things and shaking hands and taking these actions and surrendering. And I don't want to hear about some abstruse psychobabble that literally sounds so nice at the time, but literally kills you because there's nothing left for you. You know so much. It's like being on the deck of the Titanic. I'm not getting off till I find out why this happened. And you may find out why it happened. You people in the boats, ha 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 ha! I know why it happened. And it turns out going down knowing why is of no use to us. What it boils down to is this. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other to maintain their own sobriety and to help others. A is a program that really boils down to love and service. It means that you and I, who are fortunate enough to be here, better remember that. Because as Bob said, people 45 years sober get drunk again, and people 30 years sober get drunk again, and people 10 years sober get drunk again. And all you have to do, you don't have to do anything bad. You just have to stop doing the things that keep you sober. The natural state of alcoholics is drunk. That's why we have to be here. The last thing I'd say today is that it's hard sometimes when you're new because it doesn't seem to address your problems. Perhaps we're all born with an inner scale that should be even and we feel good. And little by little as you drink and live our lives, on this side a big black mass slowly takes place. And pretty soon you oh man, I feel bad all the time. But I discovered drinking gets rid of that scale. But then you get sober again and it's a little worse. And finally you come to A. I don't know what's wrong, but I feel out of whack. Well, I'll tell you what, newcomer. This thing down here is eating my lunch. We're going to ignore that. Ignore that? Yes, we're going to work on this side over here. There's nothing wrong with that side. It's this side. Now, you just be patient. Here's a little bucket of actions and a little spoon. It's not doing any good. Just keep doing it. See you at the meeting tomorrow. You do it long enough, one day that thing starts to move. And eventually, most of us know that feeling. There's a great feeling. Freedom! I found what I'm looking for. A is wonderful. It's just... But through some celestial prank, there's a tiny hole on this side. And every time you just get that baby right. Oh, thank you so much, A. It's just, for Christ's sake. So keep your bucket in your hand for the rest of your life, Slim, I'll tell you that. But it seems to me there's nothing we can do about this side, but if we don't take care of this side, it'll kill us. But A gives us actions to do, simple action, simple extending one's hand, helping others, and, of course, to remember that it's love and service. We all know what love is. We all know what service is. We can start off by guarding that erring member of the tongue. We can try never to be too busy to help alcoholics who still suffer. Because if we hadn't found someone to help us, we wouldn't be here today. This is really a great program. Don't let people screw it up. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here. remote control is connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.